What I saw was fun, never anything inappropriate. What I saw was work and play at work and fun. Mrs. Cosby was a frequent visitor to the studio. She was there a lot. That's what I saw.
It's fragile, and in the blink of an eye,
you never know.
You never know. So speaking of legacy, what do you hope that your legacy is going to be?
There is part of me that I will be able to leave this earth, knowing and people knowing that I was a good person. I spent, so much of the early part of my life listening to, being celebrated on one hand, but paying way too much attention to the naysay. And I was kind of going through a period that I was having a struggle with hopelessness.
To the world, Malcolm-Jamal Warner was the quick-witted son we all grew up with. But to Felicia Rashad, he was far more, her real-life son in every way that mattered. Which is why her shocking revelation after his final days hit like a thunderclap. She says she saw the signs no one else noticed, that Malcolm was fighting a silent war the cameras never caught. And what she revealed about those last moments doesn't just change how we remember him. It raises the question, what really happened to the man we thought we knew? From the outside, Malcolm-Jamal Warner and Phylicia Rashad were just co-stars, two actors who happened to share the screen during one of television's most iconic runs. But behind the cameras, their connection was something much deeper. Rashad once admitted, Malcolm wasn't just another young actor to me. He was my son in every sense except blood. That bond wasn't for show. It was real, lived, and lasting. Over the years, Felicia became a mentor, a guide, and at times even a shield for Malcolm. Industry insiders recall how she would pull him aside on set, whispering advice about everything from handling fame to protecting his spirit in a business that devours young talent. One director who worked closely with them remembered, if you saw Felicia with Malcolm, you understood instantly. This wasn't just acting. This was family. That sense of family wasn't only comforting, it was telling. Because decades later, when Malcolm began to drift into silence, withdrawing from the spotlight, it was Felicia who noticed first. Friends would say he looked tired, or that he was just busy with music, but Rashad felt something heavier pressing on him. She confessed in one interview, I could see it in his eyes. The laughter was there, but the light behind it was fading. It's that kind of statement that makes people stop and wonder, what was she really seeing? Was it exhaustion from a lifetime in the public eye? Or was it something darker, something no one else dared to talk about? Her words carry weight because she was the one person who had stood beside him since his teenage years. If anyone could sense a storm brewing beneath Malcolm's calm exterior, it was Phylicia Rashad. And as whispers began to circulate about his health, his sudden cancellations, and those cryptic late-night posts that left fans uneasy, it wasn't the press or the public who raised the first alarm. It was the woman he once called his second mother. At first, the shifts were small. Hardly anyone noticed. A canceled appearance here, a vague excuse there. To the casual fan, it meant nothing. But to those who had known Malcolm for years, the changes were undeniable. He wasn't the same energetic young man who once lit up stages and sets without effort. One close collaborator recalled, Malcolm started pulling back from things he used to love. He'd skip events, avoid interviews, and when you did see him, there was this heaviness about him, like he was carrying something none of us could name. His social media posts, once full of uplifting messages about music and creativity, began to take on a more cryptic tone. Late-night reflections about time slipping away and the cost of silence appeared between cheerful updates, leaving fans unsure whether to read them as wisdom or warning. One fan commented under a now-deleted post, "It feels like he's trying to tell us something without really saying it." And then came the whispers. Quiet talk of canceled concerts, unexplained absences from rehearsals, and a growing tension behind the scenes. People began to ask, was it exhaustion? A private health struggle? Or the weight of carrying an image for so many years that no longer matched who he really was? For Phylicia Rashad, those weren't whispers at all, they were alarms. She later revealed, there were moments when he would look right at me, and I could see the sadness hiding underneath. He'd smile for everyone else, but not for me. I knew what that meant. What exactly did she mean by that? And why did she believe she was the only one who truly recognized the depth of his struggle? These early cracks in Malcolm's carefully built image weren't just signs of stress, They were the opening lines of a story far more complex and far more tragic than anyone was prepared to believe. For years, Malcolm-Jamal Warner carried himself with the calm grace of someone who had survived child stardom without scandal. To the outside world, he was proof that success could be clean, that fame didn't have to destroy you. But behind that polished image, another truth was unfolding. Industry insiders began whispering about long absences and unexplained breaks in his schedule. A fellow musician once hinted there were days when Malcolm just disappeared. No calls, no messages, just gone. When he came back, he'd brush it off, but you could tell something was eating at him. Fans speculated endlessly. Some believed it was exhaustion. Others suspected he was battling an illness he didn't want to reveal. And then there were darker rumors, whispers of depression, of private struggles that never made it to the headlines. His silence only fueled the speculation. What makes this even more haunting is Felicia Rashad's later confession. She said Malcolm was fighting battles no one could see. He was too proud to admit when he needed help, and too strong to let anyone think he was weak. That kind of silence is the most dangerous kind. The weight of fame can be crushing. Imagine being frozen in time as the world's teenage son, while decades pass and expectations never fade. Malcolm himself once remarked in an interview, "People still look at me and see Theo. They don't realize I've lived a whole lifetime since then." It was a statement meant to be lighthearted, but in hindsight, it sounded like a quiet cry for recognition beyond the character that defined him. Behind the music, behind the occasional acting roles, behind the carefully composed public image, something darker was pressing in. And the closer you looked, the clearer it became. Malcolm wasn't just stepping away from the spotlight. He was retreating into a silence that few dared to question, until it was too late. The silence could only hold for so long. By the time Malcolm's inner battles started to bleed into his career, those closest to him knew something was unraveling. He began canceling public appearances at the last minute, leaving fans confused and organizers scrambling. One promoter described the shock, saying, "We got the call just hours before the event. No explanation. It was like he was running from something we couldn't see." Behind the curtain, the pressure was mounting. Industry friends whispered that he was withdrawing not just from work, but from people. The once approachable, magnetic Malcolm was now hard to reach, even for those who had shared stages and studios with him for years. A collaborator later revealed, "You text him, and sometimes weeks would go by with no response. When he did answer, it was short-distant. It felt like he was building walls around himself." And through it all, Felicia Rashad kept sounding the alarm. She described one chilling encounter where she tried to comfort him during a particularly difficult stretch. "He looked at me and said, 'I'm fine, Mama.' But I could hear the crack in his voice. That wasn't fine. That was a man trying to convince himself he could hold everything together." The breaking point was no single event. It was a slow, quiet collapse. The illness he kept hidden, the expectations he carried, and the loneliness of fighting in silence all merged into a storm he could no longer escape. Rumors spread quickly once he stepped out of the spotlight for good. Some claimed he was secretly hospitalized. Others believed he had chosen seclusion to shield himself from an industry that had given him everything yet left him with nothing. And just when fans thought they understood, a new layer of mystery appeared. Conflicting reports, contradictions in timelines, and the absence of any clear statement from Malcolm himself left the truth tangled. What really happened in those final days? Why did the people closest to him remain so guarded about the details? For Felicia Rashad, the answer wasn't in the rumors or the speculation. It was in the silence he carried, the silence she had tried to break. But by the time the world caught on, that silence had already turned into the most devastating of goodbyes. The days leading up to Malcolm's final moments were shrouded in secrecy, and that secrecy is exactly what fuels the unease that still lingers today. Friends who tried to check and said he seemed distant but determined, as though he were tying up loose ends without actually saying goodbye. One longtime colleague revealed, "We had a meeting set. He canceled at the very last minute. He just said, 'I need time,' and that was the last I ever heard from him." Neighbors later recalled seeing him only briefly, quiet walks at odd hours, headphones on, head down, avoiding interaction. It was a stark contrast to the Malcolm who once greeted fans with warmth and familiarity. And then came the revelation no one was prepared for. According to insiders, Malcolm had been privately battling an illness for months, maybe longer, refusing to share the details even with those closest to him. A friend close to the family confessed he didn't want to be seen as weak. He thought if people knew what he was going through, it would define him. But the most chilling words came from Phylicia Rashad. In her raw reflection, she admitted he was carrying a darkness that he wouldn't put into words. I begged him to open up, but he just smiled and told me he'd be okay. That was the last time I saw that smile. The official reports offered little clarity, and in their silence, the rumors exploded. Some whispered about a hidden diagnosis. Others insisted it was the crushing weight of fame and years of bottled-up pressure. The lack of answers only deepened the mystery and the heartbreak. For fans, it was a devastating shock. Social media lit up with messages of disbelief, tributes, and anger. How could someone who gave us so much joy be gone just like that? One post read, echoing the collective grief of millions. But beneath the grief, there was also guilt. Guilt that so many had laughed with Theo Huxtable without ever noticing the man behind the character was quietly fading away. The shocking final days of Malcolm's life weren't just a tragedy. They were a wake-up call, a reminder of how invisible struggles can hide behind even the brightest smiles, and how silence can speak louder than words. When the news of Malcolm's passing broke, the world didn't just react, it erupted. Within hours, hashtags like #JusticeForMalcolm and #RememberTheo dominated social media feeds, uniting fans, colleagues, and even casual viewers who had grown up watching him. What started as grief quickly turned into a movement, a chorus of voices demanding answers, recognition, and remembrance. Co-stars and collaborators poured their hearts out publicly. One director wrote, "Some actors leave the set and move on. Malcolm left his heart on set every single day." A fellow musician described him as the type of man who celebrated your wins even when he was drowning in his own struggles. These tributes painted a picture far more complex than the polished public persona. Malcolm wasn't just an actor or musician. He was a mentor, a friend, a quiet giant who carried more than anyone realized. But the most powerful response came from Phylicia Rashad. Refusing to let grief consume her, she transformed it into action. She launched the Inside Voice Project, a mental health initiative aimed at breaking the stigma for Black men in the entertainment industry. In her own words, Malcolm fought in silence. "I refuse to let anyone else carry that burden alone." The project quickly gained traction, drawing support from artists, activists, and community leaders. What began as a tribute has since grown into a lifeline, a platform for voices that once felt silenced. Tributes didn't stop at words. Across the country, fans organized memorial gatherings, from candlelit vigils in New York to viewing parties in Chicago, where people rewatched their favorite Cosby Show episodes, sharing personal stories of how Malcolm's work shaped their lives. One fan at a vigil in Los Angeles summed it up perfectly. "He taught us to laugh when life was heavy." Now we carry that lesson forward. Networks began working on a special television program dedicated not to his characters, but to the man behind them. Never-before-seen interviews, behind-the-scenes footage, and personal testimonies promised to reveal the Malcolm the world rarely got to know. The father, the friend, the silent fighter. His legacy now lives far beyond the screen. It's in the conversations sparked by his story, in the movement that demands we look deeper at those who seem fine, and in the reminder that silence is never the answer. For those who grew up with Theo Huxtable, Malcolm's memory is more than nostalgia. It's a symbol of courage, vulnerability, and the power of speaking out before it's too late. And perhaps that's the truest part of his legacy. He reminded us that every smile hides a story, and every story deserves to be heard. Malcolm's story doesn't end with the credits rolling or the lights fading. It lives on as a warning, a reminder of how easily silent battles can go unnoticed until it's too late. The signs were there, the distance, the missed calls, the walls he built around himself. But in a world that moves too fast, those signals slipped by, hidden behind the smile of a man who gave so much to others while giving so little to himself. As one close friend admitted, "I thought he just needed space. I never imagined that space was where he was losing himself." That's the danger of silence. It convinces us everything is fine, even when it's not. And that's where the wake-up call comes in. Malcolm's journey forces us to ask the uncomfortable questions. How many people around us are smiling through pain? How many loved ones are carrying storms we never stop to notice? His story challenges us not just to watch, but to act, to check in, to listen, and to believe someone when their words don't match their eyes. Because if Malcolm's legacy teaches us anything, it's this: silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it's the loudest cry for help. Malcolm's life was filled with brilliance, humor, and creativity, but his departure left a wound that still aches. Fans will forever remember Theo Huxtable, the lovable son who made us laugh, but those closest to him remember the man behind the role, a man who carried too much in silence. Felicia Rashad's words echo as the lasting truth of his story. Malcolm fought in silence. I don't want anyone else to go through that alone. Through her advocacy, his story becomes more than tragedy. It becomes a movement, a push to break the stigma, to shine a light where silence once ruled. And for us, the viewers, the fans, the friends who never got to say goodbye, Malcolm's story is now in our hands. It's a reminder to speak, to listen, and to never underestimate the weight someone might be carrying behind a smile. When the lights fade and the screen goes dark, Malcolm-Jamal Warner's legacy doesn't end. It lingers, as a voice urging us to notice, to care, and to make sure no one else's silent battles turn into final goodbyes. So the next time you think someone is fine, remember Malcolm. Ask again. Listen harder. Because sometimes just noticing is enough to change everything.